The sound of a mine roof giving way isn't a crash, it's a groan. It's the sound of millions of tons of ancient rock waking up and realizing it doesn't want to be held up anymore. Elias froze, his hand hovering over the hydraulic lever, his eyes locking onto the pressure gauge that had just spiked into the red. He didn't look at the exit. He looked at the kid, the rookie standing 20 feet deeper in the cut. In that split second, beneath 2 miles of West Virginia sandstone, Elias knew that the check he just cashed might be his last. And the silence that followed was louder than any explosion he had ever heard. The alarm clock on the bedside table didn't buzz. Clicked, a sharp, mechanical sound that cut through the darkness of 3:30 a.m. like a pickaxe striking slate. Elias Thorne didn't groan, didn't roll over. He simply opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling fan that hadn't spun in years, and let the reality of another Tuesday settle into his bones. His knuckles were swollen, a permanent topographic map of scar tissue and coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly erase. He sat up, the mattress springs protesting under his weight, and placed his feet on the cold linoleum floor. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic, soft breathing of his wife Martha, sleeping beside him. He moved like a ghost, a habit formed over 3 decades of not wanting to wake the house before the sun came up. In the kitchen, the coffee pot was already set, the timer ticking down. The coffee was black, bitter, and hot enough to scald the tongue, just the way he needed it to jumpstart a heart that felt heavy this morning. Elias looked out the kitchen window. There was nothing but the obsidian black of a pre-dawn Appalachian morning. The silhouette of the ridgeline was barely visible, a jagged jawbone against the stars. This was Mingo County, where the mountains hugged you tight or choked you out, depending on their mood. He pulled on his boots, the leather worn smooth and gray at the toes. They were steel-toed, heavy, caked in the dried gray mud of the prep plant yard. Every lace he tightened felt like he was strapping himself into a capsule. He grabbed his lunch pail, the metal tin dented from 1,000 shifts, packed the night before with a bologna sandwich and a honey bun. The drive to the Black Hollow mine was a solitary ritual. The winding roads carved into the hillside were treacherous for the uninitiated, but Elias could drive them blindfolded. His headlights swept over the trees, catching the occasional reflection of a deer's eyes. He didn't listen to music. He listened to the engine, the tires on the gravel, and the quiet hum of his own anxiety. It never fully went away, that hum. You just learned to tune it out. The parking lot was a sea of pickup trucks, their beds filled with tools and empty Mountain Dew cans. The air here was different. It smelled of diesel, wet rock, and sulfur. It was the smell of the industry, a scent that clung to your skin and seeped into your pores until you tasted it in your sleep. Elias walked toward the bathhouse, nodding to the men he passed. There were no long conversations at 4 a.m., just nods. Inside the locker room was a cacophony of slamming metal doors and the zip of coveralls. Elias stripped out of his street clothes and pulled on his mining stripes. He strapped on his belt, heavy with the weight of the self-rescuer, and the battery pack for his cap lamp. He checked the light. Bright focused beam cut through the locker room haze. It was his lifeline. Without it, he was a blind man in a stone tomb. "Morning, Elias," a voice chirped. It was Caleb, the new kid. He was 22, fresh-faced, with hands that still looked too clean. I had that eager energy that veteran miners looked at with a mix of pity and worry. "Morning, son," Elias rumbled, his voice rough from years of breathing dust. "Check your methane detector. Calibrate it twice." "Did it last night, boss," Caleb said, grinning. "Do it again," Elias said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that brokered no argument. "The mountain doesn't care what you did last night. It only cares about what you missed this morning." They walked to the elevator, the cage. It was a rattling, open-sided metal box that descended into the throat of the earth. As they piled in, shoulder to shoulder with 20 other men, the light from the surface began to fade. The cage dropped. air pressure changed, popping ears. The temperature stabilized to a constant damp 55 degrees. They were leaving the world of the living and entering the domain of the dead. As the Mantrapa Loslung railcar designed to navigate the tunnels rumbled deeper into the mine, Elias let his mind drift back to the surface. It was a coping mechanism. Couldn't think about the millions of tons of rock above your head every second or you'd go mad. You thought about the light. You thought about the bills. The kitchen table flashed in his mind. It was covered in paperwork. The mortgage was mostly paid, but the medical bills for Martha's hip surgery were stacking up like cordwood. That was why he was still here. He had eligibility for retirement 2 years ago, but the pension wasn't what it used to be, and the healthcare benefits had been slashed in the last contract negotiation. He remembered Martha's face last night. She had been kneading dough, her hands dusted with flour, looking so much like she did when they first met at the county fair 30 years ago. "You tired, Eli?" she had asked. Just the usual, he had lied. He was always tired, bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. But he did it for her. For the way she hummed when she gardened. For the grandkids who needed braces. The man-trip lurched around a corner, the wheels screeching against the tracks. They were 3 miles in now, Sector 4. This was a new cut, deep and unstable. The geology here was tricky. Sandstone roof was riddled with kettle bottoms, fossilized tree stumps that could drop out of the ceiling without warning, crushing anything below. Elias looked at Caleb sitting across from him. The kid was texting on his phone, even though there was zero signal down here. Just looking at old messages, maybe pictures of a girl, Elias felt a pang of sadness. He wanted to tell the kid to go back to school, to learn to fix computers or drive trucks above ground. But in this town, the mine was the only economy. It was the gravity that held everything together. "All right, boys, let's make some dust," the foreman shouted over the noise of the ventilation fans. The man-trip groaned to a halt. They grabbed their gear and stepped out into the blackness, their cap lamps slicing through the gloom like lightsabers. The continuous miner machine sat waiting like a dormant beast, its massive cutting head resting on the floor. Elias climbed into the operator's cab of the roof bolter. His job was arguably the most dangerous in the mine. After the continuous miner chewed out the coal, the roof was unsupported. Elias had to drive his machine into that unsupported zone and drill steel bolts into the rock to hold it together. He was the one stitching the wound the miner created. The work began. The noise was deafening. The roar of the cutter head, the grinding of the conveyor belts, the hiss of hydraulics. Coal dust filled the air, thick and black. Even with the ventilation curtains, it coated everything. Elias tasted it on his lips. He checked his gauges. He drilled. He bolted. He moved forward. It was a dance he knew perfectly. A waltz with a partner that wanted to kill him. For hours in, lunchtime was approaching. The rhythm of the shift had settled. Elias was drilling a bolt into a particularly hard section of sandstone. The drill bit wind, a high-pitched scream that vibrated through the controls and into his arms. He wiped sweat from his eyes, leaving a streak of black grime across his forehead. Caleb was working the shuttle car, driving the coal from the face to the belt line. He was getting better, handling the heavy machine with more confidence. Elias watched him for a second, nodding in approval. Maybe the kid would make it after all. Then the air changed. It wasn't a sound at first, it was a pressure. Elias felt his ears pop hard. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, a primal instinct triggering deep in his brainstem. The ventilation curtain fluttered violently, sucking inward toward the face. "Stop the cutter," Elias yelled into his radio, his voice cracking. "Shut it down, now." The operator of the continuous miner killed the power. Hush. The roar died instantly, replaced by a terrifying groaning creak from above. It sounded like a wooden ship breaking apart in a storm, but amplified 1,000 times. The ribs, the walls of coal on either side began to spall. Chunks of coal popping off like gunshot. "Get back. Move back to the crosscut," the foreman screamed. But they were too slow. The mountain didn't wait for safety protocols. A thunderous crack echoed through Sector 4. The floor heaved upward. This wasn't a roof fall, it was a pillar failure. The massive columns of coal holding up the mountain were exploding under the pressure. The world turned into chaos. Dust billowed out instantly, blinding them. The wind knocked Elias sideways against his machine. "Caleb," Elias screamed, scrambling off the bolter. He couldn't see anything. Its light reflected off a wall of gray dust that was thick as soup. He heard a crash, the sound of rock meeting steel. Then silence. Absolute, heavy silence. The fans had stopped. The power was cut. Sound off. Elias coughed, pulling his shirt over his nose. "Who's there?" I'm here," a voice whimpered from the dark. It was Caleb. "My leg. I can't move my leg." Elias crawled. He stayed low, feeling the floor. He found the shuttle car. It was buried under a slab of slate the size of a pickup truck. Caleb was pinned inside the cab, the metal twisted around him. Elias shone his light around. The tunnel behind them was gone. A wall of rubble blocked the way out. They were sealed in a pocket of air, maybe 50 feet long, cut off from the rest of the crew, cut off from the world. Time loses its meaning in the dark. There is no sun to mark the hours, only the slow drain of a battery and the beating of a heart. Elias worked feverishly for what felt like an hour, using a pry bar to try and leverage the slate off Caleb's leg. It wouldn't budge. The kid was pale, his eyes wide and glassy in the beam of the cap lamp. "It's bad, isn't it, Eli?" Caleb asked, his voice trembling. "It ain't good, kid," Elias admitted, sitting back, gasping for air. The dust was settling, but the air felt thin. "But we ain't dead. And if we ain't dead, they're coming for us." Elias checked his multi-gas detector. Oxygen was at 19%. Methane was creeping up. He reached into his belt and pulled out a bottle of water, handing it to Caleb. "Sip it, don't gulp." They sat in the dark. Elias turned his lamp off to save the battery, leaving only Caleb's dim light on. The darkness at the edge of the light felt like a physical weight, pressing in on them. "My mom's gonna be so mad," Caleb whispered, a tear cutting a clean track through the dust on his cheek. "I promised her I'd be careful. She didn't want me down here. She wanted me to go to community college." "Listen to me," Elias said, his voice stern but gentle. "You're gonna tell her yourself, you hear me? You're gonna walk out of here." But Elias knew the truth. He knew the geography of Sector 4. They were deep. The collapse was massive. Rescue teams would have to stabilize the roof every foot of the way to get to them. It took time. Time they might not have. Elias closed his eyes and let the hallucinations come. It was common when the CO2 levels rose. He saw his kitchen. He smelled biscuits baking. He saw Martha standing in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She wasn't sad. She was waiting. "Eli," she whispered in his mind. "Don't you dare leave that boy." He snapped his eyes open. He had to keep Caleb talking. The kid went into shock. He was done. "Tell me about the girl," Elias said, shifting his position to keep the blood flowing in his cramped legs. "The one you were texting, Sarah?" Caleb managed a weak smile. "She works at the diner. She has the prettiest laugh. Like ... Like wind chimes." "Wind chimes," Elias chuckled dryly. "That's good. We hold on to that sound. You hear those chimes right now? You understand? Don't listen to the rock. Listen to the chimes." Hours passed, or maybe days. The oxygen alarm on the detector began to chirp a slow, rhythmic warning. "Beep, ... Beep, ... Caleb's breathing was shallow. He was drifting. Elias grabbed the kid's shoulder and shook him. "Stay with me, Caleb. Stay with me. I'm tired, Eli. It's so dark." Elias looked at his own hand. It was trembling uncontrollably. He felt the panic rising. The lizard brain screaming to run, to claw at the walls. He forced it down. He was a coal miner. He was the son of a coal miner. He didn't panic. He endured. He moved closer to Caleb, wrapping his arms around the boy's shoulders to share body heat. The mine was cold now, a damp chill had settled in the marrow. Elias began to hum. It was a hymn his grandmother used to sing. "Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on, let me stand." He sang into the darkness, his gravelly voice filling the small stone tomb. He sang for Caleb. He sang for Martha. He sang to keep the mountain at bay. Elias was dreaming of sunlight when he heard it. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a vibration, a low thrumming that shook the dust on the floor. He opened his eyes, which felt like they were filled with sand. The battery on his lamp was dead. Caleb's light was a faint, dying yellow ember. "Caleb," Elias croaked. His throat was so dry it felt like it was bleeding. "Caleb, wake up. They're here." The kid didn't move. Elias fumbled for his hammer on his belt. He crawled to the nearest roof bolt plate, a steel square drilled into the ceiling. He struck it. He waited. From the other side of the rubble, a faint, muffled sound. Clang, clang. Tears streamed down Elias's face, hot and fast. He hit the plate again, harder this time, putting every ounce of his remaining strength into the swing. He was signaling, "We are here. We are alive." It took another 4 hours. 4 hours of the sounds of heavy machinery getting louder. 4 hours of voices shouting muffled commands. Finally, a beam of light pierced through a small hole in the rubble. It was the most beautiful thing Elias had ever seen. It was a harsh white LED light, blinding in its intensity. "Sector 4 call out," a voice shouted through the hole. "2 souls," Elias screamed back. "1 trapped. Need a medic?" The rescue team moved with the speed and precision of surgeons. They cut through the last of the rock. Men in full gear swarmed the small pocket. Oxygen masks were strapped onto their faces. The sweet, cool rush of pure air hit Elias's lungs, making him dizzy. They used high-pressure airbags to lift the slate off Caleb. The kid groaned as the weight released, but he was alive. They strapped him to a backboard. As they passed him through the hole, Caleb reached out a hand, grasping blindly. "Eli," he mumbled behind the mask. "I'm right behind you, son," Elias said, gripping the boy's hand for a second. "I'm right behind you." The ride to the surface was a blur. The cage ascended, and for the first time in 30 years, Elias didn't look at his boots. He looked up. He watched the darkness turn to gray and the gray turn to blue. When the cage gate opened, the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple and orange. The air smelled of diesel and fall leaves. It was sweet. Martha was there. She broke through the line of police tape, her face streaked with tears. She didn't say a word, just collided with him, burying her face in his coal-stained chest. Elias held her, his knees finally giving way, sinking to the ground with her in his arms. He looked over her shoulder and saw Caleb being loaded into an ambulance. The kid gave a weak thumbs up. 6 months later, Elias sat on his front porch. The rocking chair creaked rhythmically. His leg was stiff nerve damage from sitting in the cold too long, but he was walking. He held a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise over the ridge. He wasn't wearing his mining stripes. He was wearing flannel and jeans. A truck pulled into the driveway. It was Caleb. The kid was walking with a cane, a permanent souvenir of Sector 4. But he was moving well. He climbed the porch steps and sat on the railing. "Morning, Eli," Caleb said. "Morning, Caleb." "They're sealing Sector for today," Caleb said quietly. "It's unstable. They're shutting down that whole wing." Elias nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "It's for the best. That mountain was done with us." "I got into the tech program at the community college," Caleb said, looking at his hands. "Classes start Monday." Elias smiled, a genuine, bone-deep smile that reached his eyes. "That's good news, son. It's the best news I've heard in a long time." Caleb looked out at the hills. "Do you miss it? The dark?" Elias looked at the scar on his hand, then at the golden light flooding the valley. He thought about the brotherhood, the shared struggle, the pride of the work. But then he thought about the fear, the crushing weight. "I miss the men," Elias said softly. I always will. But the dark, no, I don't miss the dark. I think I've seen enough dark to last me 2 lifetimes. He took a deep breath of the cool mountain air, tasting not coal dust, but pine and damp earth. I'm done digging, Caleb. It's time to just live.